Hello, everybody. I'm Professor Shahram Akbarzadeh. I'm convener of Middle East Studies Forum at Deakin University. Welcome all. I'm delighted to welcome our four speakers from Moscow and from Islamabad, talking to us about the future of peace in Afghanistan. I must acknowledge that this project is sponsored by Carnegie Corporation, New York. The project was launched early last year, looking at how proxy relations in Afghanistan and Syria impact the dynamic of conflict and prospects of peace in those countries. This is one of many policy forums that we'll be running. There is a second one on Afghanistan that's scheduled for 30th of September. So please check our website and find out details of our speakers and our panel. But for now, looking at Afghanistan is very pertinent. We are coming up to the 19th anniversary of September 11 and the US involvement in Afghanistan. So 19 years of international investment and international engagement in Afghanistan, but also international meddling in the affairs of Afghanistan. Now, we have all followed the news of discussions regarding peace process, a deal that was brokered between the United States and the Taliban at the exclusion of the Afghan government, so which is quite a bizarre situation. We're keen to watch and keen to see how events evolve and how foreign powers, regional actors, regional organizations can help bring Afghanistan to peace and end the conflict. So to kick off the discussion today, I'll start with Dimitri Trenin, who is a director of Carnegie Moscow Center. And then we'll follow on with Professor Rifaat Hussain, head of Department of Government and Public Policy at the National University of Science and Technology in Pakistan. He's also a member of the Advisory Council on Foreign Policy under Prime Minister Imran Khan's government. Then we move on to Senator Sehar Kamran, who is the patron-in-chief of a non-partisan think tank, the Center for Pakistan and Gulf Studies. Senator Sehar, during 2012 to 2018, was also an elected member of the Upper House of Parliament in Pakistan. And then we move on to Lieutenant General Naeem Lodhi, retired, who served in the Pakistani Army as a defense secretary and also as defense minister in 2018. He was conferred the award of Hilal Imtiyaz military for his distinguished career in the Pakistani Army. So with that very brief introduction, I'd like to invite our first speaker to start with his reflections and ideas regarding the prospects of peace in Afghanistan. I'll invite everyone to maintain silence during the presentation. So if you could all put your mics on mute, and then we will have time for Q&A, and I will invite you then to share your ideas. So Dimitri, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Shahram, and it's a big honor for me, a privilege to address this audience today. I must start with a disclaimer. I'm not someone who is particularly well suited to talk about Afghanistan itself. I'm someone who is looking at Russian foreign policy more globally. And Afghanistan is part of a fairly wide waterfront that Russia is faced with. So let me, with that disclaimer, let me lay out the following brief points on how Afghanistan is viewed from Moscow. This year not only marks almost 2 decades since the U.S. Operation in the beginning of the U.S. operation in Afghanistan. It's also 4 decades since the start of the Soviet war in Afghanistan that began in 1979. So 4 decades on, I think that the consensus in Moscow is that Afghan politics, including the politics of peace, is essentially for the Afghans to solve. And Russia would not, does not, and will not interfere. The Russian interest, I think, is fairly important, but also fairly modest. Russia, since the downfall of the Soviet Union, does not have a direct border with Afghanistan, but the borders that do exist between the Russian territory and Afghanistan are not very effective barriers, which means that you have to watch what's happening in Afghanistan very keenly in order to make sure that Afghanistan does not again become a base for terrorists and extremists who might threaten Russia's immediate neighborhood in Central Asia and Russia itself. Because as I just said a moment ago, there are no defensible borders essentially between Moscow and Kabul. And that is something that will not change in the foreseeable future. I think I would need to explain that Russia is worried about those extremists and those terrorists who would want to go beyond the borders of Afghanistan. What happens within Afghanistan is for the Afghans to sort out. But going beyond that territory is particularly in the northern direction, is something that concerns Russia a lot. The second concern that Russians have with regard to Afghanistan is that it has became a long time ago, a producer and exporter of narcotics. And many of those drugs find their way to Russia across Central Asia. And there's statistics to show that Russia's lost so many more young men due to narcotics than it did during the war in Afghanistan in the 1980s. The government in Moscow would also add that Russia does not support a long-time international military presence in Afghanistan. So it wants an Afghanistan that's neutral, that does not host foreign military forces. But frankly, I think that this is a vital concern for Moscow. The two most important concerns are terrorists, extremists, and drugs. And the main threat that the Russians see right now is ISIS, so-called Islamic State, that is that, as the Russians see it, has built a presence in the north and the northeast of Afghanistan, and that is being viewed with much concern in Moscow. And Russia would reach out to anyone who is willing and capable of checking that threat. Russia supports the talks that are periodically taking place between the Kabul government and the Taliban. And some of those talks, indirect as far as the government was concerned, were held in Moscow in the past. Even though the relationship between the government in Kabul and Russia has been fairly tenuous recently, Russia supports those talks. Russia has contacts with the Taliban, as I said, faithful to its principle that is primarily employed in parts of the Middle East and elsewhere. You stay in contact with all relevant players in the region. Otherwise, you simply cannot operate effectively. So both the government and the Taliban are being contacted by Russia in various ways and forms, but Russia stays in touch with both antagonists, if you like, in Afghanistan. And very lastly, let me say that from the Russian perspective, I should reiterate, the future of peace in Afghanistan is essentially an Afghan matter. And Russia does not really have a view as to what kind of a regime should rule Afghanistan, as long as that regime does not trespass the borders of Afghanistan, as long as Afghanistan keeps to itself. The nature of the regime does not really concern Russia very much. With regard to outside groups, Russia certainly lays premium on its relationship with the countries of the former Soviet Union that are members of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, not much of a military bloc, but it gives Russia physical presence in the countries that border Afghanistan, actually in Tajikistan and also just north of it in Kyrgyzstan. There are small Russian military contingents in both places, and those contingents are focused on what might erupt out of Afghanistan. Russia is also cooperating with those countries, essentially the countries of Central Asia minus Turkmenistan, which is a maverick state, as we all know, with regard to security and police collaboration. This relates to drugs trafficking, not very effectively, in my view, for the reasons that I think we all understand. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization has an anti-terrorist cell or unit in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. This is essentially an information center, and some sort of coordination also is involved among the members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that has expanded to include most recently Pakistan and India. It's also a platform for policy exchanges and discussions. But Russia lays a premium, I think, beyond the Collective Security Treaty Organization on bilateral relationships, bilateral ties with countries ranging from China and Pakistan to Iran and India. And there are periodic discussions with the United States. As long as the United States is physically present in Afghanistan, as long as the United States has an interest in what happens in Afghanistan. So let me stop here. I think I've used up most of my 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sticking to time, Dimitri. That's fantastic. And it's also a really good overview of Russia's interest in Afghanistan and the region, and the number of issues that are of primary concern for Russia and policymakers in Russia. So with that, I think we shift the focus now to Pakistan. I'd like to invite Professor Rifaat Hussain to share his insights. Again, we're going to stick with the same time frame, 10 to 15 minutes max. Professor Rifaat, the floor is yours. Perfect.
Am I audible now?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Shahram. It's wonderful to see you.
Good to see you too.
And to know that you have been keeping well. And my greetings to all the participants, particularly from Russia and my colleagues from Pakistan who are tuning in for this webinar. I will be very brief, but I would like to start with a historical backdrop, because it's important for us to understand that how Afghanistan became the proxy battle that we are talking about, which is part of the project amongst the regional countries. So my one sentence definition of proxy war is that I define it as the use of non-state external actors, often violent, to weaken the power of an adversary. And as this definition we apply it to Afghanistan, we find that Afghanistan was not a battleground for proxy war until the overthrow of the monarchy in April 73. And following that development, the landlocked Afghanistan began to attract the attention of distant neighbors. Pakistan tried to promote an Islamic uprising against the Dawoodi regime, which had overthrown the monarchy, but its effort failed. But the critical factor was the outbreak of Saur revolution in 78, which turned Afghanistan into a battlefield of proxy war by its neighbors and other outside powers, especially the US, which wanted to roll back expanding Soviet influence inside Afghanistan. The US took the lead during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 79 in financing and arming Afghan Islamic resistance that was divided along ethnic, sectarian, and tribal lines. But the Soviet military invasion of Afghanistan in December 79 was a watershed event in the evolution of proxy war inside Afghanistan for three primary reasons. One was the invasion eliminated Afghanistan's status as a non-aligned country or as a buffer state and opened it to an influx of jihadi forces from all across the Muslim world. And secondly, it led to the financing and arming of Mujahideen groups to wage Islamic jihad against the godless communists who were in power in Kabul. And we all know that how former President Reagan had described Soviet Union as an evil empire. So that was the second reason. And the third reason was that during the Afghan jihad, over 5 million Afghan became refugees, and they became the recruiting sites for CIA and the intelligence services of Pakistan to find fighters who would be picked up from these refugees camps to wage jihad against the PDPA regime in Afghanistan. So this is the brief background that I wanted to highlight as the starting point for our discussion of the role of different neighbors of Afghanistan when it comes to the phenomena of proxy war and how it may impact the Afghan peace process. So the first point that I want to make is that is relates to the fact that Afghanistan's heavy dependence on the outside financial and military support the Afghan state's own role. So Afghanistan is dependent on the military and the financial largesse of the outside powers, particularly NATO and the ISAF countries. So they are playing a very important role as far as the stability or the longevity of the Ghani government is concerned. So that's a point that we need to keep in mind. And of course, we also have Afghanistan today is divided into different zones of influences that are being controlled by different players. These players include warlords and their armed militias, the different groups of Taliban military commanders who are working toward their ultimate goal of establishing Islamic Emirates. There's an ISI and the Daesh presence inside Afghanistan in the southern and eastern parts of Afghanistan. So any discussion of the success of the Doha peace process has to take these fundamental realities into account. Now, my own take on the Doha peace process is that it is, even though it is being projected as a landmark agreement, but it only deals with an understanding that has been developed between Washington and the Taliban. That's the point that was highlighted by by Shahram also, the other players, including the Ghani government, are not part of this understanding. So this is what I call the design flaw of the Doha peace deal. In addition, the Doha agreement has left all the real issues, including ceasefire, to be negotiated between the warring parties. So this would ensure that the next phase of intra-Afghan dialogue, if it starts, can easily break down any time. The trade-off between the security of American troops and commitment to ensuring that Afghanistan soil will not be used for launching Al-Qaeda ISIS attacks on the American interests is hard to implement. There is considerable evidence to suggest that in the southern and eastern parts of Afghanistan, the Daesh groups remain active, and some of the disgruntled elements of Taliban are lending them support. So these are the fundamental realities on the ground against which we have to weigh the prospect for the success or the failure or the fragility of the Doha peace process. Now let me briefly turn to Pakistan's role. Islamabad has expended its limited diplomatic clout to bring Taliban to the negotiating table, but I think it runs the risk of being blamed should the intra-Afghan dialogue fail to deliver peace. Pakistan would suffer from the influx of new refugees, adverse impact on contiguous provinces, Pakistani provinces of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan, and arms and narcotics, and reactivation of criminal gangs and banned TTP outfit, which is being housed inside Afghanistan. So Pakistan's concern is really based on its geographical proximity to Afghanistan, and that is something which is driving Pakistan's policy towards Afghanistan. If it would, and now let me briefly turn to Iran. Tehran is apprehensive about the role of US troops in Afghanistan due to Washington's policy of exerting maximum pressure on Iran and subject Tehran to strategic coercion. Because of its common borders with Afghanistan, Tehran can have a direct influence on development inside Afghanistan. It can use its links with the Shia groups present in central and the western parts of Afghanistan to play the role of a peace spoiler, especially if Tehran feels that its legitimate security interests have been ignored in a future power sharing arrangement. Let me briefly now turn to China. Beijing is worried that an unstable Afghanistan can destabilize its western region of Xinjiang, where Uyghur Muslims have been agitating. It would like the American troops to withdraw from its backyard, but not in a precipitous manner. So China has maintained its lines of communication with the Taliban since 2004, and the Taliban delegation have been invited to Urumqi and a couple of other places inside China to hold talks with the Chinese leadership. So China is very careful in describing the Taliban not as a terrorist group, but they describe them as insurgents or as militants. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about Russia, but that has already been addressed by my friend from Russia. But I would like to briefly note that Moscow has also reached out to Taliban even before the Doha peace talks started. The Taliban would be acceptable to Russia if Taliban do not allow the Central Asian jihadist groups or Chechens to have sanctuaries in Afghanistan. That's a key concern which was highlighted by my friend from Russia also. And Russia shares with American, Iranians, and Pakistanis their concern about the presence and resurgence of Daesh in Afghanistan. Russia also does not want drugs from Afghanistan to be shipped to Russia through Central Asia. So these are some of the interests of the regional powers which we need to take into consideration. And as far as my assessment of the Afghan peace process is concerned, it is often said that one should not use the word optimism in the same sentence when mentioning peace in Afghanistan. So I would conclude by saying one should hope for the best while preparing for the worst. We have Afghan security horizon cluttered with too many proxies working at cross purposes, and that could easily derail the fragile peace talks in Afghanistan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Rifaat. That is a sobering assessment of the various players and their interests in Afghanistan, and let's do hope for the best for the peace process. And as you have noted, it's going to be quite a significant challenge to bring both parties, the government and Taliban, around the table and have them talk about peace and future directly. So that's the most significant hurdle at the moment. So with that, I think we'll move on to Senator Sehar Kamran to share with us her insights.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Dear participants, members of the organizing team, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. May peace be upon you all. Let me commence by extending felicitations to the Deakin University for arranging this webinar on the proxy dynamics and peace in Afghanistan as a part of their Middle East Studies Forum dialogue process. Needless to say, this is a timely activity, and I'm delighted to be a part of this academic exercise and to share my thoughts on this subject of regional significance. Thank you, Dr. Shahram. Thank you, Dr. Zahid, for giving me this opportunity. I'm confident that today's discussion will prove to be a step in the right direction. Today, the world is feeling the fatigue of the one war, owing to the longevity of the conflict and the draining of monetary and physical resources. The international community, especially the US, wants to end this longest running war. Even though the US-Taliban peace deal was welcomed by the majority of the world, though cautiously, it needs to be mentioned that this deal recognized a group of people as political counterparts and power brokers of the country, who until now were projected as the biggest threat to the international peace and security for more than 1.5 decades. How the tables have turned. It's interesting to note. The international community, especially the Western one, seems to be in conundrum where the Afghan theater is concerned. Why? Because they are unsure of evolving Afghan situation and what comes next. Dear colleagues, it needs to be understood that no long-term solution can be found until the proxy dynamics within Afghanistan are understood and the threats are neutralized. It's no secret that it is one of the biggest impediments in achieving peace and stability in Afghanistan. For a better understanding of the proxy dynamics, we can divide it into internal and external fronts. The internal one comprises of the militant groups present within the country, groups like Islamic State, Khorasan province, Al-Qaeda, and Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, to name a few, and their affiliates. The external front is between states, especially regional ones, who have competing interests in the country and the region. The most glaring one is between Islamabad and New Delhi. On the other hand, there is Iran and its influence on the proxies in Afghanistan. All roads to regional peace lead through Afghanistan. We have been hearing this, and no doubt the regional countries have a huge responsibility, and the biggest threat is the fear of an ensuing proxy wars, post-foreign troops withdrawal, especially between Pakistan and India. It's no secret that New Delhi doesn't harbor positive views towards the recent Taliban peace deal because the US withdrawal will hurt its regional interests. Moreover, it perceives the peace deal as a Islamabad's victory. The government in Kabul under President Ghani has been India's ally in the Afghan war and has time and again acted as a spoiler to the peace efforts in the country. It is hoped that India looks at the bigger picture and doesn't work to sabotage peace efforts in Afghanistan. The country and the region can't afford it. On the other hand, one shouldn't forget Tehran's influence, especially within southwestern part of the country, which came to limelight post the assassination of Iranian General Soleimani earlier this year in January. Iran's leverage over the proxies in Afghanistan was even acknowledged by the US Secretary Mike Pompeo, who warned that Tehran could disrupt the peace process. Undoubtedly, these are murky waters which need to be treaded carefully. Dear friends, achieving peace is not a one-day or a month process. It takes 10 years to prepare the negotiation grounds on which the foundations of a peace agreement are laid. In this context, the regional bodies like Shanghai Cooperation Organization have played an active and a positive role. The peace talks on Afghan issues were launched and progress has been made with the mediation of SCO member states over the years. For instance, the first meeting of Afghanistan, Pakistan, United Nations, China Coordination Group was held in Islamabad on 11 January 2016. It is an attempt to revive the peace process. Since then, the QCG has conducted a number of important meetings. Similarly, Russia has hosted a number of Afghan peace talks of special representatives from Russia, China, Pakistan, and United States of America in its bid to reach a sustainable settlement in the war-hit country by political and diplomatic means. Dear friends, for peace to prevail, diplomatic efforts are for sure essential. Moscow format meeting or Afghan peace conference in Moscow has been one such effort. The Russia's initiative was aimed at settling the Afghan conflict. 11 countries participated in the meeting alongside the Taliban representatives and the Afghan delegates. Though Kabul government did not directly take part in the meeting, however, it was indeed a rare sight to see the Taliban insurgents sharing the platform with the members of the High Peace Council of Afghanistan, which oversees peace efforts, and individual Afghan leaders were present. The Moscow format was a positive move towards discovering the ways in order to resolve Afghan conflict. The move also showed Russia displaying its diplomatic power. The SCO, in its Bishkek summit in June 2019, signed a roadmap for further action of the SCO Afghanistan Contact Group, which outlines cooperation with Afghanistan in terms of economic and trade, security, and people-to-people exchanges. Last year, the SCO Secretariat held roundtable negotiations on Afghanistan with experts from members states, which shows the body is actively observing the evolving situation in Afghanistan. Dear colleagues, at the international level, the UN Secretariat has been actively involved in the Afghan peace process. In April, it convened a 9-nation virtual discussion on the regional efforts to support peace in Afghanistan, which included the country's neighboring states plus United States and Russia. In addition, the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, its UNSC political mission, mandated to work until 17 September 2020. Since its creation in 2002, United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan has stressed on the importance of a comprehensive and inclusive Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process to support reconciliation and of advancing regional cooperation to promote security, stability, and development in Afghanistan. Similarly, international bodies like Organization of the Islamic Cooperation have been playing a positive role, as acknowledged by the Afghan President Ghani and the Foreign Office, who praised both the organization and the Secretary General for his contributions towards the attainment of sustainable peace in Afghanistan. Dear friends, the only acceptable option for a responsible withdrawal of foreign troops in the peace process is one that does not leave behind the poisoned seeds of renewed civil war, nor a power vacuum. Only a negotiated peace settlement that has broad-based support is a viable option. The regional countries, major powers, and international institutions have a huge responsibility, which they have been bearing for almost 2 decades now, especially Pakistan. Pakistan has directly borne the brunt of the violence and conflict in Afghanistan and has paid a heavy price with the blood of its citizens and armed forces, as well as financially. Moreover, Pakistan has been hosting Afghan refugees for 4 decades since 1979. 1.4 million registered refugees and maybe equal number of unregistered refugees. It is hoped that peace in Afghanistan becomes a durable reality rather than a distant dream. A sustainable political settlement for Afghanistan is not only about doing a deal with Taliban, it is about defining a state that Afghans are willing to support. The international community's main investment should be in facilitating a sustainable political settlement. I wish the team of Deakin University the best of success in the work they are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. You have put your finger on quite a number of important issues regarding the role of international community and how that commitment should work towards sustainable peace, towards providing security, like it's human security for Afghan citizens. And also the question of power vacuum, that withdrawal of troops shouldn't really lead to a power vacuum, which could then be the start of a whole new round of conflict and tension. So thanks so much for your input. We'll like to, I think we'll move to our last speaker. We're very much keeping to the time allocation, so thank you to all speakers. General Naeem Lodhi, you are next on the list.
Thank you very much, sir, and my greetings to all the panelists and all the viewers. Thank you, Deakin University and Middle East Forum, Studies Forum. I, being a retired general and not a diplomat, maybe some of my things, they seem to be curt, but forgive me for that. We all know that proxies, employment of proxies has become a norm in today's world. Basically because the nature of war is transforming. It is not, you can say, acceptable politically and economically, the clash of titans, the clash of forces of countries and states. They have found other means of, indirect means of, influencing the opponents. And they do it through resources other than their own forces. It can be through economic hitmen, it can be through media, psychological operations, political entities, creating instability, and of course the armed groups. And I think Professor Saab has very aptly covered the definition and all that. Coming on to this nature of peace in Afghanistan, I would say that this peace is uneasy in its nature. And why it is so? Because United States did not want this situation before they could negotiate a peace. And why I say that? Not that I never say that they have been defeated in Afghanistan. I say that there was a stalemate, and it was not moving in either direction. But according to a Russian definition, and I am happy that Russian friend is there, any campaign that results in net politico-economic loss is a failure. So what is the political loss for Americans? They could not win the hearts and minds of the people of Afghanistan. And as far as economic losses are concerned, I need not go into the details. And why did it happen? Just, for the posterity, I think we know the history of Afghanistan. I will not go into the details. We know the geography of Afghanistan, which is difficult. And then the incentives of fighting of the two sides. I will not go into detail because such aware of audience is there, so you can just think about yourself that there was a very large difference in the incentives of the two sides which were fighting. I mean the soldiers which were fighting on the two sides, and of course one big element was also the nature of society, the tribal society versus the democratic society. One side can take a lot of casualties, the other side cannot. So probably that could also be one of the reasons of this stalemate, as we call it. And then I would like to say a few words about two myths. One thing that we say that the best way of resolving the issues is by negotiations. Yes, in a civilized world, that should be the best way. But no important political issue between two significant entities has been resolved through negotiations only. Nations and states, they apply all elements of their power, and ultimately a situation is created where the negotiations take place. And that has happened. That is what has happened happening in Syria. That what has happened in Yemen and in Afghanistan and elsewhere also. So I think this thing should be kept in mind. And secondly, this myth of, for the time being, this myth of Afghan-led, Afghan-owned peace process. So far, whoever is leading the process, whoever is owning the process is very well known. So it will be some time before Afghans can really take ownership of this process and can really lead this process themselves. For the time being, it is not happening in that direction. Of course, they should be involved. And now this process, I think, is moving slowly but steadily in the right direction. One or two main impediments have been removed. Release of prisoners that has taken place. Intra-Afghan dialogue is likely to start. And about intra-Afghan dialogue again, people think that intra-Afghan dialogue only means a dialogue between Afghan Taliban and Afghan government. No, sir, there are many factions in Afghanistan, and I think Russia did an excellent job 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago by providing the platform at Moscow where intra-Afghan dialogue already took place. Many groups from Afghanistan, they talked to Afghan Taliban at Moscow, not once but twice. And at one of the occasions, I think the number of individuals that attended that was more than 100. So I think this intra-Afghan dialogue is an ongoing process, and it should not be construed that only talks between Afghan government and Afghan Taliban is intra-Afghan dialogue. I think that is happening. Now, why I am optimistic about this peace process that is likely to succeed, unlike what Professor Rifaat said. We know that there are detractors, those who don't want this peace to, all they want to delay it. But there are entities, those who want peace. So I will just list them, and then we can compare that which side is more likely to prevail. Those who do not want peace, I mean, we say the top of them is India, because of obvious reasons. They will lose the ground which they use against Pakistan. So about America, let me say candidly that whereas they are very much interested that they must exit in a peaceful manner, but whether they would like to leave peaceful Afghanistan is suspect as far as I am concerned, because peaceful Afghanistan means what? Peaceful Afghanistan means some progress in CPEC. It means more influence of China, Iran, Central Asian countries, and maybe some access to Russia, to the warm waters. And all these things are not acceptable to Americans. So they will try to keep their influence in a way, and in my own humble opinion, they would like to keep a turmoiled Afghanistan so that all these things that I mentioned do not happen the way these are being planned. Then there are gun runners in Afghanistan, there are narcotic barons in Afghanistan, even the sitting government. I mean, who would like to leave that chair if you are in power? So who would like that that power should be shared, or that power should be given up? So I will stop at that. That these are the entities which would not like to have peace, or which would like to delay the peace process. But who would like to have peace in Afghanistan? The most important entity are the people of Afghanistan. They are fed up. They want peace. And generally speaking, across Afghanistan, everybody would like to have a peaceful Afghanistan, and for obvious reasons. Pakistan would like to have peace, and I mean, we don't have to, if you have a 2,500 kilometers border, and ethnic affinity and religious affinity and economic stakes. So why would Pakistan not like to have peace in Afghanistan? And Iran this time also would like to have peace in Afghanistan, in my opinion. Central Asian countries, Russia, China. So this group, which I have just mentioned, is quite strong, and they are likely to prevail in spite of all the detractors and all that. And in my opinion, by the time the next American president takes over in America, the establishment in United States will not be able to reverse the process, it would have gone to that extent, although it is going slowly, but still it will go to that threshold where probably it will be very difficult to bring it back. This is what I wanted to say, that why proxies are being used and what is the nature of war, what is the nature of this peace process, and who all want peace and who all do not want peace, and overall what is the likely outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, General Lodhi. That's very insightful, and I think I have to concur, and I think everyone will concur, that people of Afghanistan want peace. People of Afghanistan are fed up with war. It's been going on for decades, and enough is enough, really. So the question is, how do we actually get to peace? How do we get to sustainable peace? And also there's a question of justice, which I'm sure will come up in the course of our Q&A. What kind of peace are we talking about? Is justice going to be served? And whether various human rights are going to be protected and preserved. So these are some of the issues that I guess pop up in the course of the conversation. But I'd like to invite my colleague SAFIULLAH TAYE, who is working with us at Deakin University. He is working on his PhD, looking at aid in Afghanistan and reconstruction of Afghanistan. So to really reflect his views, Safi, if you don't mind unmuting yourself, you're free to share your perspective.
Oh, thank you, Professor Shahram, and I'm very, very honored to be given the chance to speak for a few seconds or few minutes, I would say. So I'm not trying to deal much with the with what it was the whole topic, but rather maybe just a bit of reflection on what has been said. And I think I'll just start with what Mr. Lodhi just mentioned. And I think an Afghan colleague just also put a message up there that why do you think the Afghans are not capable of reaching or doing their own negotiations and reaching peace? And I think that kind of fits into this topic, because if we think that this is an Afghan issue only, then we would be expecting the Afghans or not expecting the Afghans to reach a negotiation. But the fact that we are talking about proxy wars, and I think Dimitri at the start talked about all these aspects, and I think Professor Rifaat also talked about all these elements, that peace in Afghanistan is not just a matter between the Afghans themselves. There are so many stakeholders. The fact that, Mr. Lodhi, you just mentioned that there are so many people that you said these people, they want peace in Afghanistan, but what kind of peace they want in Afghanistan as well. I don't think Pakistan wants the same peace as the Iranians they want, and I don't think Iran wants the same peace as China or Russia or other Central Asian countries they want. And I don't think any of these countries have the same exact definition. I don't think even within these Doha talks, the outcome of it would be something that even the Saudi Arabia or the UAE would agree on the future of Afghanistan. So I think, yes, there are so many elements into, yes, everybody wants peace in Afghanistan, of course, including the Afghan people. But I think the Afghans at this point are very much clueless about what is exactly happening. A while ago, I was talking to one of these Afghan seniors in Kabul, and he said that given that all of us, we sit together and we have some sort of agreements, we don't know what is happening parallel to our meetings somewhere else in Pakistan or in Iran or in Moscow or somewhere else, because there are so many actors involved here. And I think what Senator Sehar just mentioned about all these aspects of foreign interventions, but at the same time foreign influence in Afghanistan. So I think when we look at what is actually happening in Afghanistan, there are so many stakeholders. There are more than 45 countries that are directly right now giving aid to Afghanistan. Over 65% of Afghan national budget is being supplied from foreign aid coming from all these countries. The entire security of Afghanistan, especially the direct funding coming to Afghan security forces, which the salary of the Afghan police force are giving to Lutfa, it's all being given by the international community. So of course, these actors, they expect much for whatever happened so far in Afghanistan. They want their own outcome to be somehow reached in this. So I think my own reflection would be that I think it's unfair to say that the Afghans, at some point the Afghans will be able to do this. I think Afghans are capable to do that right now, but only if it was just on an Afghan issue only. And the fact that there are so many layers, there are so many elements into this, into the conflict. So the fact that negotiation is not going to be fruitful in Doha, that's my opinion for the time being. Or even the government in Kabul is not really willing to take all these risks to just accept whatever the Taliban is giving it to them. It's because that they're in a sense, their hands are tied and they don't really know what proposal would they accept that it would not hurt them in the long term. So that's why the Afghans are very much scared of what even this round of talks would bring back. And I think Professor Shahram, you rightly mentioned that, there are so many, all these activists, and especially people in Afghanistan, they really want peace. But to attain that, it means that they have to be hundreds of stakeholders happy, and that would be something very, very impossible to reach at this point in time.
Thank you so much, Safi. We take it as a comment. I see that everyone has mastered the art of raising hand in Zoom. So I see hands raised. That's fantastic. When I invite you to unmute yourself, would you mind introducing yourself and where you're from for everyone, just in case we don't know you? So the first person I'd like to invite is Seema Khan. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Professor Shahram. This is Seema. I'm actually, I can say I'm both Aussie and Pakistani. As of now, I'm working in Ministry of Commerce, Government of Pakistan, but I'm a Deakin student. My thesis has just been submitted for the examination. So I think it's the brief intro. First of all,
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I should thank all the speakers who have in detail told us about the information, what they have, or the experiences they have from the civil perspective and the military perspective. I tend to agree with Safi because I'm in the same boat, the researcher as of now. Thank you, Safi, for highlighting the different and multiple stakeholders in the region. Being Pakistani, my question to especially General Lodhi, because I'll always be interested in the proxy war in terms of fighting and the issue, what you can say, nationalist perspective, because Professor Rifaat is analysis is more on you can say impartial, but being very nationalist from deep in my heart, I would like to ask Professor Rifaat, do you think that America is in a rush to leave Afghanistan and leaving a space for its proxy, another proxy, which Pakistan was actually playing earlier? Now it's India there. So, I mean, how do you feel that leaving India is to contain China? But Safi has said that there are multiple factors, multiple stakeholders. And then how would it impact Pakistan, especially the Western provinces, KP and Balochistan? Because we know that most of the intrusion or most of the radicalization and extremism or even the terrorists is coming from Afghanistan to Pakistan. So how do you see that leaving Afghanistan, it is already maybe, I cannot say leaderless, but it's still when it's not in a compact form, in a solid state form. So how do you see that it will further deteriorate Pakistan's security situation? Thank you, sir.
Professor Rifaat, if you'd like to respond, or anyone on the panel, if you'd like to respond.
If Professor Rifaat is there, then let him speak first. Then I will also add something.
Professor Rifaat is on mute.
Okay, then if you allow, I can take the lead.
No,
okay, he's there.
I've just unmuted myself. Okay. Thank you, Seema, for that very interesting question, which is that, who would replace the existing proxies and what are the timelines which will agree with Washington's compulsion to withdraw from Afghanistan? I think the question has to be looked at, but I am not sure that we have reached a stage in the Doha peace process whereby we can predict whether American forces are, particularly if the Trump administration is unable to win the next round of elections. So their commitment to withdrawal will be stalled by Pentagon officials, and there are already reports indicating that Pentagon has been pushing back the American effort to withdraw the American forces by mid 2021. The question of dealing with proxies is very important, at least from Pakistan's perspective, because Pakistan feels that the TTP groups, particularly now they have been joined by other militant groups. That's an alliance which has undertaken in the past, and also in the recent past, they have undertaken attacks against the Pakistani forces. So Pakistan's fear is that, in the absence of a peace deal, Pakistan-Afghanistan border may get, may become the proxy battle from the groups which are operating on the side of Afghanistan. And in that context, Pakistan has recently, as you may have read it in a newspaper, Pakistan's foreign secretary led a delegation for negotiation with the Afghan government, and they reached an understanding whereby both countries are trying to implement the confidence building measures along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. And in that context, I think while this is an important development, but I would not like to put too much hopes in the survival of the Ghani government's regime, particularly if there is a power sharing arrangement that develops, and Ghani government feels that they do not benefit from that power arrangement, they might like to stall the peace process. So these are some of the worries that Pakistan has vis-a-vis what may transpire in the next round of Doha talks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Rifaat.
If I'm allowed
General
to
Lodhi,
add,
please
just
go ahead.
Yes, one or two things. I base my response on the premise that everybody should have learned lessons. Afghan Taliban, other Afghan factions, the neighbors of Afghanistan, and based on that, what Pakistan would like is a politically and economically stable Afghanistan. If it is friendly, that would be a bonus. And we would like that there should be economic activity, because that benefits all of us. And in my own opinion, I may be wrong, this time, as my friend from Afghanistan was saying that Iran wants a different type of peace and Pakistan wants a different type of peace. Actually, we all know that Russia, China, Iran, and Pakistan, they are talking to each other about Afghanistan. And they are likely to be more closer this time, and more likely to be vying for the same type of peace rather than different types of peace. So basically, it is the economic activity that must be generated there, and everybody will benefit, all the players that I have. And it is for the Afghans to assert themselves. And, I should not be misconstrued once I said that it is not Afghan-led. I was talking about this present. But if Afghans, they assert themselves properly and look after their own interests and do not allow the detractors to disturb this peace, I think this time the prospects of peace are better. And the reasons I've already given. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Abbas, would you like to unmute yourself?
Thank you very much, Professor Shahram. I just have a brief comment and a question. So what I heard, the voice from our colleagues from Pakistan is quite similar what we have had in the past, especially, particularly in the 1980s, when there was a negotiation between the Afghan government and Mujahideen at that time. At that time, also, the Afghan government framed as peace spoiler, and in a Geneva Accord, Afghan government excluded. As a result, Afghanistan went into another civil war. So the question is, this time, particularly Pakistan, which kinds of peace Pakistan really want in Afghanistan to have? So which kinds of arrangement? We have heard for a long time that Pakistan wants a friendly, stable Afghanistan. What actually does it mean? Because for a long time, Afghan leaders, Karzai and Ashraf Ghani, went to Pakistan and offered economic cooperation and proposals to have a transit way for Pakistan to Central Asia, for example, TAPI, CASA 1000, and all those kind of projects. But actually, it's not lead to a kind of cooperation. So which kinds of peace Pakistan wants in Afghanistan, and which kinds of role will play this time that be different from what have had in the past in 1980s in Geneva Accord. So how it can lead both countries to a stable relation in the future and cooperation and peace. And the second point, what I heard from colleagues, that a kinds of imagination from Afghanistan, that different parts of Afghanistan controlled by different actors like warlords, the Taliban, and the government. Actually, the reality is a little bit different. There's two major parties, the Taliban and the Afghan government. And warlords, they are not in the past that we have had in 1990s. It's totally different situation. They are mainly, their leaders are in Kabul, involved in political processes. Just most of the territory is controlled by the government, and on the peripheries, they are the Taliban. So I think that kind of imagination also important that lead our the colleagues to different types of analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I should add that Abbas Far is also doing PhD, writing his PhD thesis at Deakin University on proxy conflict in Afghanistan. And if you have, I'm sure you have noticed from his name, he's also from Afghanistan himself. I might just build on what Abbas is saying, chair's prerogative, and add another question to the panel. And that is, how much influence and leverage do you think Pakistan has over the Taliban, and how would it manifest itself during the peace negotiation, or even more fundamentally, in the future shape of Afghanistan? It's an open question for anyone on the panel. Dimitri, don't feel excluded. It'd be good to have that perspective from Moscow as well. But General Lodhi is ready to go.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, my greetings to Abbas Saab, brother from Afghanistan. I would like to bring out the difference between the situations, the last situation which is mentioned once Russians went away, and this time. You know, the last time what happened was there was a total vacuum. Russia left, Americans left. And Afghans were left at their own, and then there was some infighting, and Iran and Pakistan, they were on the opposite poles. What I am saying again and again, that this time, the powers which want peace in Afghanistan are quite strong. Along with the people of Afghanistan, Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran. And Iran and Pakistan will not have that sort of misunderstanding which happened last year. This is my assessment. I may be wrong, and I hope that Afghan people, as you said, sir, just your question, Afghan people, in my reckoning, are fiercely independent people and brave people. We love them. They are beautiful people. They are wise people. And I don't think they accept a lot of influence, except for in very dire situations. You know, whenever you are not economically independent, if you are not politically independent, naturally there are influences from here and there. But you asked about the influence of Pakistan on Afghan Taliban. Not much. The communication is open. We keep on talking to them. They do listen to us at times, and they do not listen to us at other times. And that is the Afghan nature, as I said initially. So this time, in my humble opinion, the situation is different. The players have learned their lessons, and the groupings that want peace, they are quite strong. And inshallah, with the Afghan people will get peace this time. And this question that what type of peace? Peace is only of one type, that whenever there is political stability and good economic activity and no war with the neighbors, that is what is peace. I do not know of any other type of peace.
Shahram, if I could just for a second jump in.
Yes, please go ahead.
With regard to the question of Pakistan's influence over the Afghan Taliban, who are engaged in the Doha talks, I think relative to all other actors, Pakistan enjoys a much greater degree of influence vis-a-vis the Taliban. if you were to compute it in relative terms. But as compared to Pakistan's older relationship with the Taliban, Pakistan's influence has diminished. And the reasons are obvious, because of Pakistan's global role in the global war on terror, and the arrests of so many Afghan key leaders by the Musharraf regime, who were handed over to the Americans, and they were taken to Guantanamo Bay, including the Afghan ambassador Mullah Zarif. And he has written a book about my life with Taliban, in which he does not have a single kind word to say about any Pakistani. So
Okay.
so this is the kind of hatred or the animus that some of the Taliban leaders feel very strongly towards Pakistan. But by and large, Pakistan has been able to create good relationship with the Taliban. And that's one reason. That's one reason why Pakistan is not willing to stick its neck out in ensuring an outcome of the peace process. Pakistan has been saying that it's an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process, because we have learned our lessons that if we are too active, or if you are seen to be heavily leaning on one side, then there are consequences, and Pakistan does not want to think of those consequences. Thank you.
Can I invite Dimitri perhaps to share his perspective, especially if he just posed the same question towards Russia in terms of the level of influence that Moscow might have over the Taliban? We know that there has been talks and negotiations, but does that mean influence? And if so, what does that mean for the peace process? Is Moscow keen to see this peace negotiation proceed, or is there a different perspective?
Well, I would say that there is influence. Russia has no significant influence in Afghanistan, nor I don't think, nor is it seeking this influence. I think it burnt its fingers badly in Afghanistan. So what it needs now, and I think what it practiced even 20 years ago, was some useful contacts with people who wield influence and who wield power inside Afghanistan, so that those people could, if their interests and the Russian interests coincide or are in parallel, then there can be a degree of cooperation, but it's not through influencing those people. Russia has an experience, again, 2 decades ago of pretty effective relations with the so-called Northern Alliance in Afghanistan that served also Russian interests for a period of time, and then it became instrumental in toppling the Taliban regime in Kabul in 2001 at the start of the American operation. Right now, I think the Russians look at the Taliban as potentially a force that would hold in check the ISIS elements in the north of Afghanistan, but it's not like wielding influence, and it's not wielding influence to, let's say, shape the form or nature of the future government in Kabul. I think that the Russians would accept any kind of a peace deal that the Afghans themselves would be able to make. Russia is keen to have peace in Afghanistan, not simply because they are a peace-loving nation. I think we're all peace-loving nations in a way, but because peace in Afghanistan would also mean that the bad people, ISIS, the other descendants of Al-Qaeda, will have no business in Afghanistan, will have no place in Afghanistan. Again, what happens within Afghanistan is not Russia's business. I think Russia learned that lesson and paid a huge price for that and doesn't want to revisit it. And they looked at the United States effort, which failed spectacularly, again, of rebuilding Afghanistan along a different set of lines than the Soviets tried, but still it ended in failure. So what happens in Afghanistan is for the Afghans. Russia is primarily focused on bad things, not hatching a nest in Afghanistan, bad people not hatching a nest in Afghanistan again and threatening particularly Russia's neighborhood and Russia itself. That's the issue. Otherwise, of course, Russia is helpful. It is hosting inter-Afghan conversations, but the Russians are are making a point of not even being present in the room when Afghans talk to Afghans. It's an internal Afghan dialogue without any Russians. Russians would meet with them, but outside the room, and after the conversation in the room is over. That's what the situation is.
Right. I mean, this was a very hard lesson learned. In many ways, Afghanistan was America's Vietnam. So I can understand why.
Just a brief comment.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. I would say, Dr. Shahram, that challenge is not yet over. Challenge is ahead. We have to see the post-US election scenario. As in past, we have witnessed like a lot of policy shifts by US. But one thing that is common is that the apprehension of all the regional countries and the neighboring countries. That I could see, I have heard Dimitri also and the other participants also, that the apprehensions are about peace, about terrorism, about drugs, and this is what exactly is going to impact every country, especially Pakistan. Because Pakistan, what is more important for Pakistan, its location where Pakistan is geographically located, and Pakistan is looking towards connectivity. You know, if there is peace in Afghanistan, then Pakistan can benefit most because Pakistan would like to connect to the Central Asian countries. Pakistan would like to connect to East, to West, because Pakistan-China Economic Corridor is one of the initiative of connectivity. Pakistan would like to be benefiting from the economic activity, and that is only possible when there is peace in Afghanistan. Yes, it might hurt some of the interest of our neighboring countries, and that we fear. But exactly, I would say that other regional countries who don't benefit otherwise would like to see a peaceful Afghanistan. And what is positive this time is the political engagement. And Taliban's agreement to be the part of the political process. Earlier, $1 trillion was spent on the war, not on the peace, stability, and the development in Afghanistan. But I believe that this time there is a clear understanding about it, and all the regional countries, especially, I would say that even Shanghai Cooperation Organization and Russia, Pakistan, Iran, everyone is looking towards a stable Afghanistan, so we can have peace not only in Afghanistan, we can have peace and within the region, and we can all benefit from that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. That's a very important intervention. We have a few more minutes. I think we can have 2 more questions. I see Mohsen Soltust has a raised hand. If you'd like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, Mohsen.
Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Mohsen Soltust. I'm from University of Queensland, Brisbane, Australia. So I would like to point to 2 important variables that have had a big impact on the proxy warfare in Afghanistan, and I would appreciate if you could respond to that. First one is the problem of sanctuaries, particularly inside Pakistan, with the porous border with Afghanistan. I didn't hear anything about this. How could these peace negotiations could actually address the issue about the sanctuaries in Pakistan? We have had peace talks before, but some of these groups retreat, they go to their sanctuaries, they come back later. The other variable is the extremist ideology that pretty much fuels the proxy warfare in Afghanistan. And if we are going to talk about the sustainable peace talks, don't we have to involve Saudi Arabia in the peace talks? Again, this has been something that has been going on at least for 4 decades. So I would appreciate if any panelists could actually address these 2 issues. And one comment about the war on terror, particularly about General Lodhi's interpretation of the war on terror, that it is not a failed policy. Since 2001 until now, the US has spent over $6.4 trillion for its involvement in Afghanistan. If this is not a failure, I would say this was a very generous interpretation to say that, well, this was a stalemate. Because with all that money that they have spent and they have not achieved anything, I would beg to disagree that I would call that a failure. At least it's a failed war on terror. Thank you very much.
If I could invite the panel to keep the response brief, because I see people are just inspired to ask more questions now.
If I'm allowed, I'll take up the problem of sanctuaries first.
Sure.
I agree that there were certain areas which were not totally under our control, and those could be used as sanctuaries. But we all know that we have paid heavy price to clear those areas. And in Pakistan, as far as my understanding, there are no more sanctuaries, especially those that will operate against Afghanistan. And the other thing is, as far as sanctuaries in Afghanistan are concerned, because there are vast ungoverned areas in Afghanistan from where entities are operating against Pakistan, that is for you to understand. As far as the failure or non-failure is concerned, I did say that the American campaign in Afghanistan has failed. Just for this, to keep the American vanity intact, I don't say that Americans have failed. I say that American campaign in Afghanistan has failed, and I have no 2 bones about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite now Arif to unmute himself and introduce himself. Next question.
Thank you, Professor Shahram. My name is Arif Saba. I'm a PhD candidate at Deakin University. My question is addressed to Dimitri and Professor Rifaat, since they brought in the role of regional powers in the peace process in Afghanistan. Well, there was a clear emphasis on the notion of Afghan-owned and Afghan-led peace process. And Dimitri clearly mentioned that Russia is not interested in what's happening in Afghanistan, but it does not want a bad outcome or a bad negative future, what's coming next. I'm trying to point out the role of these regional powers, especially China and Russia. There has been some sort of uncoordinated talks from both sides. China recently has stepped up its efforts, have been engaged with the Taliban, with Pakistan, with Afghanistan to shape the future of things that are coming, while Russia has been quite inactive in that sense compared to China. Of course, we had some dialogues, intra-Afghan dialogue hosted by Russia. What do you think the significance of, or the lack of having a regional approach through this regional powers such as Russia and China to shape the future that's we are waiting? We don't know what is the shape of these things that are coming in Afghanistan. Indeed, it does matter what's happening in Afghanistan. You mentioned, Dimitri, that just the production of narcotics and its impact in Russia, or the casualties that it's taking. So that's just one example of what's happening in Afghanistan will not stay in Afghanistan. It will impact, before it impacts America or 4 other countries, it would be the regional powers, or the regional countries, neighboring countries, that would bear the brunt of instability in Afghanistan. And also about the type of regime you mentioned, that Russia or China is not very interested in that. What do you think the significance of the lack of regional consensus on the peace process in Afghanistan, rather than, especially I'm pointing to the role of Russia and China, rather than waiting what is happening in Afghanistan to see whether the threat emerges that threatens the interest of Russia or China. As a regional powers or major powers, they do have some sort of responsibility to move beyond their interest don't you think that they have some sort of ethical or moral responsibility to step up their efforts to regional mechanism to at least influence the shape of things that are coming in Afghanistan? Because we are moving in an uncharted water. We don't know what's happening in the next few months or the shape of the things that are going to come in Afghanistan. What do you think that the lack of this regional interest or regional consensus on the peace process in Afghanistan? Thank you.
Yes, the question is open to anyone on the panel. Dimitri, go ahead, please.
Since Russia was mentioned several times in the question, let me draw a distinction between Russia and China here. I think the distinction is threefold. Russia has historical experience in Afghanistan that China mercifully does not have. Russia has acquired what is known here as the Afghan syndrome. Don't you ever again try to shape from the inside a society that is very different from yours and that you do not understand. And I think this lesson was used when the Russians went on to help rehabilitate Chechnya. There were ideas floated in Moscow by the more liberal circles of having direct Russian rule after the war and making Chechnya just like any other region of Russia. The decision taken by Putin was that Chechnya can only be run by Chechens themselves. And Moscow would deal with the power that emerges in Chechnya. Well, Russia helped install such power, that's for sure. But the idea was that what happens within Chechnya, and I think it has relevance for Afghanistan, what happens within Chechnya is Chechnya's own business. Its relations with Moscow, its relations with the rest of the federation is subject to Moscow's dealings with the leadership of Chechnya. But what happens within Chechnya is essentially the province of the Chechens themselves. So that's one, that's historical experience. China does not have that experience. It has its own experience in its own provinces in the west of the country. And that experience is different from Russia's. Economic interests. China has some economic interests in Afghanistan and it cares. It matters to China not only what kind of a regime is in place in Kabul after the U.S. is out of the country, but also what people are in charge, and that has, as I said, an impact on China's economic interests. Russia does not have economic interests in Afghanistan and is not expected to have economic interests. So it's more equanimous with regard to that issue. And finally, the resources. China has resources that put Russia's to shame in terms of financial resources, economic resources. Russia's business is Russia these days, primarily. It's not a small copy of the Soviet Union that went around the world spending zillions of dollars, whatever, on lost causes mostly. It's focused on itself. So that's not the situation of China, which has enormous resources and which is expanding through the Belt and Road and other initiatives. And China does care. Russia, of course, cares about Afghanistan not becoming a menace to the neighborhood, not becoming a menace to Russia. But the Russians also realize that there is a limit to what they can do about it, including what they can do about drugs coming out of Afghanistan. I don't think that they have many illusions about that.
Okay, I think we are almost out of time, but I see a question in the chat from Ambassador Rakesh Sood regarding the kind of peace we might see in the future of Afghanistan if the Taliban manages to come to power through negotiation, perhaps, and then tries to achieve and pushes for the establishment of an emirate in Afghanistan, which I guess the implication is the application of very strict Sharia law and limitation of various human rights. So would anyone on the panel like to respond to that question, whether that kind of peace would be sustainable?
Yeah, Shahram, if I could come in.
Please, Professor Rifaat, please.
Okay. I think that's a very pertinent question because Taliban are committed to promoting a certain value structure inside Afghanistan, and they are committed to the pursuit of Islamic Emirates, as they call it. And that question will be part of negotiations for developing a power arrangement. For example, if in a future constitutional arrangement or an interim arrangement where the rights of women, rights of minorities are threatened by the male chauvinistic ideas of the Taliban ideology, that's something which will not be acceptable to a new Afghanistan, which has in the urban areas of Afghanistan. So the question is, are Taliban's commitment to pursuit of Islamic Emirates malleable? Are they changeable? Are they willing to compromise on some of the fundamentals? So that's a question that needs to be come up for a discussion. That's one thing. The other point that was earlier made by my colleague about the role of the regional powers, I think there has been a complete absence of a regional dialogue. Particularly when we talk about the regional dialogue along with the main stakeholder, that's the United States. So United States has tried its best to keep Iran out of negotiation process because of its differences with Iran. But I think Iran as a regional neighbor, contiguous neighbor of Afghanistan, has to be brought into a framework of any kind of regional arrangement without which Afghanistan peace process simply will not work.
Thank you so much. Is there a final comment, General Lodhi?
Yes, I just wanted to say two sentences. One, that if we keep real politics in view, Afghan Taliban are a strong entity now, and we don't have to go into details. They will have a major political say in the next setup. There's no doubt about it. But why do we assume that any Islamic system will have problem for women or for problem for children? It means we are not understanding Islam. And secondly, if Taliban have said themselves that this time they have learned lessons and they have said things which will take care of the women and education and everything. So I think this is a wrong assumption.
Okay, well, thank you so much to everyone on the panel for sharing your insights. It's been much valuable. We will have another policy dialogue on the 30th of September. And Ambassador Rakesh Sood from India is going to be on that panel. So if there are more questions, which I'm sure there are, please come back on the 30th and we can reconvene and discuss these issues further. If you don't mind everyone unmuting yourself and giving the panel a lot of applause, round of applause for your participation. Thank you very much. This is all very awkward doing it online. But once again, thank you all. Thanks everyone who participated. This has been very valuable. Let's stay in touch.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Dimitri.